This is our first robust month-long celebration of Women's History Month. We have over 30 films, feature films and short films, returning favorites, brand new films, and 6 events featuring local and national luminaries, women that are leading the charge in activism, business, empowerment, arts, and culture. Viewers can access the Women's History Month programming through our app, which is available on a number of different platforms that you can watch on your TV, on your computer, on your tablet. What this is a celebration of women in all of their diversity, looking at their successes, their victories, but also focusing on the work that still needs to be done, the challenges that are facing women today.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Maureen Post from Milwaukee Film, and welcome to Week 3 of Milwaukee Film's 2021 Women's History Month program presented by Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. For the month of March, Milwaukee Film is dedicating its new programming to films and events that amplify female voices and illuminate women's experiences. This week, we turn our focus to women in STEM, and starting with a great conversation this afternoon, making her mark in the STEM world, a conversation with Laura I. Gomez. We thank you for joining us in real time if you're watching right now, but know that the event is being recorded and will be available to rewatch or share on Milwaukee Film's YouTube page. This event is in connection with our screening of the film Coded Bias. A reminder to all high school and college students and faculty that thanks to the generosity of Northwestern Mutual and Northwestern Mutual Data Science Institute, you have free access to the film through the end of the month. I will put the link, once the event gets started here, I will put the link to all the various, I'll put the link with the details in all the various chats so that you can access that information. On that note, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Northwestern Mutual, the Northwestern Mutual Data Science Institute, and Milwaukee School of Engineering. I'd also like to recognize our community partners, the Milwaukee Tech Hub Coalition, and STEM Forward. Today is the first event in this week's STEM Symposium. Please come back tomorrow evening for a conversation, female expertise. We have a great panel discussion with a group of women who all work in STEM fields and really advocate on behalf of gender equity. That event will be right back here tomorrow at 6 p.m. And then Thursday, we have a discussion led by Principal Lita Mallett of Milwaukee Excellence. She'll be talking with high school and college students who really are experiencing the STEM through the education lens and their hopes for the future of the industries. So make note of those, and we hope you join us then. But then on to today's event. Our moderator for today is Liana Nakilski. Liana is a Strategic Partnerships Director with American Family Insurance. She and her team lead on the development and management of external diversity and inclusion partnerships with community, academic, and business organizations that support deep, diverse talent pipelines for American Family. These partnerships strengthen the company's inclusive culture and contribute to building a local competitive workforce for the future. Previously, she's held several amazing leadership roles with many nonprofits, including Greater Milwaukee Committee, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Wisconsin, Highland Community School, and Growing Power. So welcome, Liana. Our guest for today's discussion is Laura I. Gomez. Laura is the founder and CEO of Atipica, Inc., a venture-backed startup and founding member of Project Include. As a young immigrant to Silicon Valley, Ms. Gomez grew up in Redwood City, the daughter of a single mother and nanny to several local tech leaders. At the age of 17, she had her first internship with Hewlett-Packard, which started her career in tech. She has previously worked at Google, YouTube, Jawbone, and Twitter, where she was a founding member of the international team, which led Twitter's expansion into 50 languages and dozens of countries. Her passion for diversity in tech extends into her startup, as well as her involvement in several nonprofits. Her passion is to lead data-driven initiatives that allow top-level leaders to understand the business benefits of machine learning and in recruiting and diversity. So welcome, Laura. So thank you both for being here and very much looking forward to the conversation, and I will leave you to it.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you all for joining us. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Laura. It is such a pleasure to share this time and space with you all this afternoon, or I guess depending on where you are in the country, late morning. So thank you for joining us. And thanks to Milwaukee Film for organizing this amazing series of events throughout Women's History Month to commemorate, celebrate, and honor the many women who uplift us all with their leadership, their power, and through the legacies they leave behind as we honor the work that they've done in history. What I love most about this conversation today and the discussions, panels, and events to come is that we are those women making history, and that this work is a verb, it is action, and hoping that the conversation today inspires you to act in some shape or form towards making your own history, or rather, her story, if you know what I mean. So I should also mention a quick few logistical things. There is a chat, a Q&A, so if any questions come to mind throughout the conversation, we'll have about an hour, maybe a little less. Please try to drop them in the chat. I'll be looking back and forth. I know the Milwaukee Film team will also be checking the chat. If we don't get to them right away, we'll definitely reserve some time towards the end for Q&A, so maybe think about some questions that we might have missed over our conversation. But otherwise, we're going to have a pretty open discussion about women in STEM, AI bias, inclusion in tech, seeing opportunity and overcoming barriers, and exploring these topics by hearing directly from our guest, Laura Gomez. But first, I'd like to provide a little bit more background about myself. As you know, my name is Leanna Nikelski. My pronouns are she, her, and Ada. When I was invited to moderate this discussion, I thought, how cool, this will be just like Oprah and Meghan Markle. Maybe not so many bombshells. However, hoping we hear, I think we might hear some juicy stories from Laura's experience in tech, from her time in YouTube and Twitter, to some of your personal connections you were just sharing, with your partner and the social dilemma. So I think there's going to be a lot revealed in our discussion, and I'm sure you will enjoy. So I think I was chosen, though, to moderate this discussion because for me, this is a bit of both personal and professionally relevant. We're going to explore the intersection of the personal and professional as well as today. So the basics, I am the daughter of an Ecuadorian immigrant mother and third-generation Midwestern Milwaukee Polish American father. Nikelski is my real last name. At a very young age, I learned how to code switch, maneuvering in and out of contrasting conversations tilted towards cultural difference. Born in Milwaukee, but growing up in Madison, I did not experience much diversity in my classrooms, my community, or my college experience. And I ended up choosing to study here in Wisconsin, mostly because I didn't consider other places outside of the state, thinking they were a little out of reach. Thankfully, we have great universities here, so I did end up at UW-Madison. Having loved math and science growing up, everyone who had something to say said engineering. So, Laura, we had a chance to talk yesterday. I shared a little bit about this with you. I was in engineering, and I got into my program, and it was, at the ripe age of 20 years old. Y2K had just happened. It was the year 2000 that I ended up switching. And I switched, I think maybe from not some of the same reasons you would want to switch, but I switched because I looked around the room and thought, I don't know if this is right for me. So as we think about this conversation today, women in tech, women in STEM, what are some of the barriers, ways that we've overcome? Laura, I think you have lots to contribute here. But as we think about this topic and this theme, how might we speak to that 20-year-old Leanna in this case, to encourage a track within them. So a little bit about me, now fast forward 20 years, I work with American Family Insurance. After a very joyful career in the nonprofit sector, you heard Maureen talk a little bit about that, getting to build these diverse and tech talent pipelines. So it's really a delight to be here. I have a handful of questions to walk through, Laura, and I think we'd like to start with your origin story. Like, who are you and where did all this?
I was born in León, Guanajuato, Mexico, which is in central Mexico. If anyone has seen the movie Coco, which is my favorite movie, it's sort of inspired by that. It's very central, it's colonial, and my family migrated here First, my mother and my father when I was 8, and then myself and my siblings later on, when I was around 9, almost 10. And so I grew up in the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area. And I tend to tell people that there's a difference between the San Francisco Bay Area, and I love the San Francisco Bay Area. I remember going to San Francisco and to the SF MoMA, to the museum, Oakland. I went to school at Berkeley, so going to Oakland for tacos and other things. And just growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which happens to be the home of Silicon Valley. And so having grown up in Silicon Valley, I was used to access to computers at school. Early on, I was learning English and computers at the same time. And so my background is really just as an immigrant, feeling like that this is my home. I still live in Redwood City. My family came here. It's been 3 decades that we've been here, over 3 decades. And so my origin, my story is that I am an immigrant. My birthplace is in Mexico, but as a bicultural immigrant that grew up in the United States, my hometown and my country is this. It is Redwood City. It is the United States, and that's why it's important to talk about the importance. That's why we held, just as this is my mother country now, it's important to hold accountable how we are treating and making sure that all types of populations are included in all types of systems, including technology, including science, including financial and professional opportunities. So that's my story. So
I think that leads in really well to, one of the things Maureen had shared about you, and we had you're the founder of Atipica, and I think it's an intersection of what you just shared, but also the expertise that you've kind of gathered along the way. Can you tell us a little bit more about Atipica and the journey of, the different work experiences you've had leading up to the launch of that startup?
Yeah, I was the founder, and so I think we'll go into it, but I was the founder of Atipica. And Atipica was a solution that brought in data and machine learning models, and I think we'll go into discussion as well, into how to understand the tech pipeline. So how Atipica came about was that I was asked in the winter, almost the winter of 2014, to be on a panel by USA Today, a journalist that was at USA Today covering tech. And they're like, we're looking for someone that has been speaking about diversity in tech. And a lot of it has been, I had been tweeting since my early days at Twitter about the lack of representation, the lack of people that look like me or other types of diversity. And so they asked me to be on this panel. And I was like, well, who do you want? We are going to have the heads of diversity and inclusion for Facebook, as well as the VP of diversity and inclusion for Google, and the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and yourself. And I'm like, what? and then obviously Richard Thompson, who is a professor of law at the intersection of civil rights and employment law at Stanford. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. Of course I'll be there. But as the conversation went on, I was getting frustrated because there was no Atipica there. I was not part of any other organization. I was just speaking my truth about my experience in tech. And I kept getting frustrated. Not necessarily everybody would be like, the Reverend and I are pretty good friends. Not the Reverend, because he had his points that he made and sure to make sure to hold the whole industry accountable. But it was at the pipeline issue. Always talking about well, there aren't enough, people of color or women, graduating with these degrees or etc. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. I understand that there might not be enough in technical roles, but are you looking, because you're looking at the top 10, there's people graduating with technical degrees in all types of universities all over the United States, maybe all over the world. And I said, and also, these tech companies don't just run on engineers alone. There's business development, there's sales, there's legal, there's policy, there's human resources. And people of color and women are graduating with all these degrees that are applicable to this. Your business doesn't run an engineering alone. And why can't you analyze? I said, you have the best data scientists in the world, engineers. That are building facial recognition with all our photos on Facebook and Instagram, and are building a self-driving car at Google. And I was like, why don't you use the data science to come in and analyze what's happening with your recruitment, with the people that are applying the application, the resume. And they're like, oh, that's a nice idea. And I was like, oh, well, and then I was like, maybe that's the idea I need to do. And so that's how Atipica was born. I do have to say a caveat that it was one of those things that I felt so honored to be on this panel, especially with a civil rights leader like the Reverend. So I asked my mom to attend, and my younger sister, and so they both attended. I think I saw my sister almost falling asleep, but my mom was very attentive, and that meant a lot to me because my mom doesn't usually attend a lot of my events. She's very busy. She feels like she can't fit in, but that was one of the things that sort of brought Atipica forward. And that's how I started. And Atipica journey really lasted 6 years. It lasted, someone once said, Laura, you are the trifecta of difficulty. I am difficult sometimes, but it is of how difficult it is. I became a solo, quote unquote, non-technical founder, which means that I'm not a programming solo founder. I am technical enough to understand though. And I think that that's where I don't get discouraged, where people were like, well, you're not an engineer. Not all founders are engineers. And we talked about this yesterday, Liana. So I was a solo founder, non-technical. I am female, and I am Latina. And it was just like 3 things that I thought I could conquer. I did for over 6 years. And we were able to land clients like Netflix, Slack, all these tools that you're seeing, and we were able to analyze their pipeline, provide analytics. We even filed a patent. And it was just such a rewarding experience to see people understand that, they need the data to look into what's happening as they're building out their diversity and inclusion initiatives. I may be wrong, but I think sometimes the press has said that I had raised the largest seed round in Silicon Valley by a solo Latinx female founder. And it was just, I know it sounds a lot. It was $2 million. It was well worth $2 million. But when your peers are raising 15, 20, 40, $50 million. So just in general, in 2019, females, and we're not talking about Black or brown females, raised 2.8 of all venture capital, just 2.8%. And so that's the struggle that Atipica did. It was a personal struggle for me to keep on going and having these meetings, asking for funds. And then it was also like validating a whole market that people didn't believe that existed. And now everyone's like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. AI in diversity and inclusion. And and I was speaking to a male founder who was very lovely, who's in consulting, and he said the same thing. He's like, I don't understand. And I was like, yeah, I was too early. I was a visionary. So Atipica had to, that was a phase of my life. And we'll talk about it later on like why I made those decisions. But yes, definitely was something that where you're using AI for good. You're using AI to understand what's happening in your pipeline. Like you can't just say like, sometimes we'll apply and they're like, we'll call you later. Like, well, maybe I applied to the wrong job. Like, will you call me when the right job opens? But that requires a human. AI can be like, yes, we'll call you when the right job opens. Or maybe I'm applying to a corporation and, oh my God, I'm applying to a corporation and I'm applying to this job, but somewhere else in that corporation, there's the right job for me. Why can't AI make that match and then reduce the biases? Don't say it's Laura Gomez. Don't say, where I live, because those are all biases. Don't say like the school I went to, just say this person is a match. You should talk to them. And that's how AI can be used. And that was the goal of Atipica. But I do believe that Atipica has cast a stone in the waters and there's ripples coming out of it. And a lot of people are thinking about this now.
Yeah, let's build on that a little bit more, because I know that you have talked about using AI, and in this case, removing bias from the hiring process. But talk a little bit more about like the different stages in which you can use AI, machine learning, from responsible to ethical, and kind of what you see in the trends in the industry, in the tech industry now, maybe even versus when you say when you were launching, Atipica 6-7 years ago.
So we're seeing a lot of people thinking about AI, like, and we be able to, a lot of people outside the industry will look at it and will be like, oh my God, the robots are coming, or some of that stuff. Artificial intelligence is embedded into our lives, whether we want it or like it or not. And sometimes it's used for those goods to understand and make recommendations, right? Like if a doctor is using an AI system to try to understand some symptoms, and it's saying, here are the symptoms, here's some things that you might like, that is saving somebody's life. So it's not necessarily this polarized, AI is evil or it's not. What happens is that AI trains itself by consuming lots and lots of data. So in our case of Atipica, it was resumes, right? Like, let's consume the resumes. And then when it does that, that data is used for training. And ultimately what AI learns, then it dictates how it performs, right? Mm-hmm. So at that base level, what happens is that people will randomize data sets. So they're like, I want pictures of everyone that posted like tacos, I love tacos, on Instagram. And so like they'll just gather all of that data set of those images, and then say next time they see something, they'll recognize like that it is that taco. But then once we actually go on and think about the data and how that's being used, is that it's randomized. Like there might not be an image that is actually tied to that. Once you randomize a training set and let the models learn, it keeps learning. And it keeps learning what they believe. So in the case of Atipica, if we had randomized the resumes to be representative of the engineers in 2015 in Silicon Valley, in startups, then it would have been highly heavy towards men and not women. Mm-hmm. And so then the model would have learned that someone qualified, has a male name, mm-hmm. went to Stanford. And so that model, if it trained itself on the amounts of data that was available 6 years ago, it would have then gone on to learn that was the most qualified candidate. If you worked at Apple, you're a better designer than if you didn't. And believe it or not, I was talking about 2015 and things I was thinking about 2015, and people in the industry are still randomizing, this data for people like in HR, in recruiting, and they still think that like Apple would be a better candidate. And those are the biases. So if the founder and the data scientist believe that yes, an Apple designer would be better than someone that didn't go to Apple, they would put it into the data set, and then that model will train it, and then it will automatically say, okay, someone that didn't, a designer here, so it will qualify it. And I've gone into discussions, actually heated discussions on panels with male founders around this, because their biases are so coded on what they believe is a qualified candidate. And so that's the training set. And so when I ask those questions to those founders, to those people building those data science team, and we're asking this, and a lot of women in tech, not just data scientists, I'm not a data scientist, I leave that to the brilliant people out there, especially women. When we ask those questions to the male founders, we're asking them to hold themselves responsible for the outcomes of those models, and then to be ethical in how they think about what the impact would be. So those are the three facets, right? Like be held responsible for your AI, and be ethical that you might be discriminating against people of color, against indigenous or native people, against international students, maybe that didn't go to the schools that you would think internationally are well renowned. So those are where we as women, especially in tech, we're constantly fighting that battle to make sure that inclusion doesn't just happen at the training data set of thinking about it, but what are the consequences? What is the responsibility and the ethics do you have once those models are out in the world?
And we're sort of seeing this play out in real life. You mentioned the article from Karen how Facebook is addicted to spreading misinformation. And I don't want to exactly quote you, but you said it's one of the biggest, most enlightening, important articles of our time. What if, for those who are watching or listening, can you give just a kind of synopsis of the article and what was so revealing about her?
I think Karen's article, because it was very thorough. And I think of our time as far as like when we're thinking about AI and what the implications of AI have done to our world, besides taking our data and our privacy. So in the article, just basically, Facebook doesn't give access to many journalists. They gave her access. She followed a couple of leaders in AI talking about these different types of foundations of AI, unbiased AI on their training set and following through. So she followed these leaders, asked the tough questions, but then she found out, and as she did her external research, that the models that they're using, so they have hundreds and hundreds of models. So every time you like something, but a model will be reduced. If it reduces engagement too much, it's discarded. So like if I post something like, oh, I'm going hiking and there's not enough engagement, like when my friends log in tomorrow, they won't see it because not enough of my other friends saw that there was engagement. So the model will discard my happiness. I was like, thank you, Facebook. I like to hike. So that is an example. But imagine putting that into a group. So an external Facebook research found that like 64% of all extreme groups are actually come to Facebook due to the recommendation models that they have. So 64% of all extremist groups in the world will come because like if I'm an extremist, I log in and I post like hate speech, the recommendation system will then give me a recommendation of what groups to follow.
Devastating.
That like for her to just go in and ask these leaders the responsibility and that they have and how do they feel about it, and discussing this with several leaders, and then at the end asking them like it was the Capitol riots had a huge impact, and it was mostly out of the Facebook organized events and groups there. So I think it's important because she wrote it, she had access to internal, she asked the right questions, she did her research, but it's also important that when she published it, a lot of male AI employees out of Facebook came back to discredit her, saying, oh, that article wasn't right and everything. And it shows the dynamics in tech, right? Like the tech ecosystem, tech journalists, scientists right away to discredit. It's also very, very, very concerning that, the addiction of Facebook to their misinformation is bigger than the responsibility and ethics of what they're doing to our society and democracy.
It's true, and it's ironic, that we're using this medium for this event even today. One of the things I had asked you and kind of want to have a two-step question is, one, do you personally use social media, and like what are the pros and cons of that, and how do you navigate that space? In I guess to the degree possible, as responsibly as you can, and then two, just speaking to some of the pushback, right, and to Karen's article. So this is kind of the second part of the question, a little separate, but speak more to what's happening now with various women. You mentioned various names in our conversation, in our prep, of women that are kind of addressing this, and what the collective power, where that rests within this movement of women in tech and the startups, not just the startup space, but women in tech particularly.
Yeah, I think what happens is that women in tech, years ago, we've said this is enough and this is what shouldn't be. It started off almost a decade ago with Ellen Pao when she filed a lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins, one of the most influential, wealthiest, biggest traditional venture capital firms here in Silicon Valley. They've invested in everything that you can possibly think of and have billions of dollars under management, probably not trillions. That was a while back. It started with her, where she said that this is enough. And so she went and filed a lawsuit. She became CEO of Reddit, where she banned revenge porn. And she tried her best there. And unfortunately, that's the same thing. She got the board and other, she had challenges there. And I won't give it away. She has a book. You guys can all read it, Reset. It's a great book. Also, disclaimer, she's also my good friend and the founder of Project Include. But during that time, I think it's really important to be like, okay, I was still at Twitter, and I remember, this will give it away, but getting my nails done. I loved getting my nails done. I remember getting my nails done and reading about Ellen, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, I felt this way. I felt what she's felt in the workplace. And as time progressed, I think there was a little part of me where I was like, I won't put up with a toxic environment in any tech company, regardless of how great it is or what the brand name is. And I moved on to actually being much outspoken. I've always been outspoken, but I believe that kind of led. And then other women followed, talking about it, like Tracy Chow actually did a whole research about how many engineers were there at Pinterest when she was there, female engineers. And it followed with almost a ripple effect. And then Uber happened. And I know a good friend of mine, Ingrid Avendaño, was there when all of the things that happened at Uber and Ana Medina. And then it continues. And it was finally like, okay, here's enough. There's a sense of like, women are not feeling welcome. We're not getting the jobs that we want. We are not getting the compensation either. The equity. When Twitter went public, I learned how much less stock I had compared to my female counterparts. It would have been the difference of me being a millionaire or not. No, I wasn't. So that's the part, right? Like, we're not getting what we need from all our contributions to the system. And so that happened, and we're seeing women. And so now we're seeing women who are brilliant leaders in their fields, like Timnit Gebru, who was at Google AI, who said the same things that probably in code bias you've seen through Joe Bolini said, where it was like, hey, we're holding this industry accountable. We're holding these tech giants accountable. And Timnit Gebru was fired from Google just in November, December over this. And then her counterpart as well was just fired as well. And so I'm seeing this play out, and I'm like, how are we silencing these brilliant voices in AI? And they won't be part of the discussions of building the systems that will eventually decide like what is being recommended, right? Like, to me, it's a little bit scary to understand that there won't be these voices of women, brilliant women, included in leading these teams at these big companies. And if you see even Karen's article, like she doesn't name one female AI scientist in the article, I believe. Like, I have to reread it. I've read it a couple of times, but like, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. I'm not one of them, but I know of many brilliant data scientists out there that are female, that are people of color, that are LGBTQA+, that come from a disabled background, but they're not there, right? Mm-hmm. So it is a little bit scary for me, but at the same time, we women were like, this is not okay. This is not okay to harass Karen on Twitter, because as a tech journalist, it's not okay for Timnit to get fired. It's not okay for us to read what happened at MailChimp yesterday, where like 30 employees have talked about how toxic the environment is. It's not okay. And we're speaking up. We're like, it's not okay.
And speaking up is the starting point, right? It's calling the injustices, the toxicity. I know you mentioned you co-founded Project Include,
Mhm.
And you mentioned some of the other co-founders. Can you talk a little bit about that work and maybe how it relates to bringing work together and to have bring some of these individual voices together to have more power and more collective action and movement forward?
I believe that projects include women for me are like the North Star, because having met them, I've been allowed to still be in this industry, still have the strength to still fight the battles that I do for underrepresented groups. So it was, as I said, started by Ellen, and she gathered other women. And as women, it wasn't, we were asking like, hey, this is enough. Like, besides like having a training on unconscious bias, can we actually have systematic changes to the tech ecosystem, starting from venture capital all the way to who you hire, and build that. And the thing is that Silicon Valley was still running on the patterns that male-founded companies like Google and Facebook and others have started, that define what qualified for you to get into. Like at one point, when I was at YouTube or Google, but I was a contractor, like they required your GPA. Like if I'm 40, like you don't need my GPA from like 20 years ago. What the heck, right? And like they required your GPA. It was just like there were so many biases in just entering into these tech companies. These tech companies create wealth. Like if you have equity there and it goes public, you might have something for your family, for yourself. You might have time to think now about, hey, maybe I want to do something. I want to start my own thing. And so, yeah, for when Project Include started and we all came together, you know, all 7 of us, I mean, including myself, it was just very, we were determined to make recommendations to the tech ecosystem. And so we did over 100 pages. As I said, Tracy, I think, was flying from China, like trying to put a website up. And we put it out there for the world to see, hey, there's sisterhood and solidarity, change for everybody. Project Include. And Project Include now has Startup Include, where they have startup founders go through the program so that they learn how to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging earlier on in the life cycle of their startups. They've had VC Include too. We're pushing, but there's only so much. It's a nonprofit and it's led by Elena. But yeah, we're all founding advisors, and it's one of the things that make change. So if anyone always ask themselves, regardless of whether you're in tech or not, what can I do? There's a lot of recommendations on projectinclude.org.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit yesterday too about your background, some of the work experience you had at different tech companies. I vulnerably shared with you, and I'll share with the viewers today, you know, at one point in my, in the last 10 years or so, was working on a startup idea with a couple of friends from my MBA program, UW-Madison, and it was maybe over a 2-year period. And I don't know, there was something about like, I didn't have, you mentioned, and I wasn't a tech, a tech degree. I didn't have the engineering degree, even though I feel like I have a pretty good, solid understanding of tech and the concepts. Also being a Latina and just also having a family and a career, and it's like the risk involved and associated. So a couple kind of questions, like how do you overcome that imposter syndrome? For any of the other aspiring entrepreneurs out there. And is it too late for me? Am I too far along?
It's never too late. No. I think like there's a study out there that the average successful entrepreneur is in their 40s. So actually the founder of What's Up was in their 40s, and now I think he's living off in a yacht off the coast in the Mediterranean. So there you go. It's never too late. And I think one of them also got rejected by Twitter as a product manager. So he was like rejected, so he's like, oh, well, I'm going to build this messaging thing. And then he sold it for billions. And now he's living his best life. So no, it's not. Oh, he also quit because he was not, I think there were several, but one of them quit because they were not okay with what's happening at Facebook. So go What's Up Founders. So it's never too late. First of all, it's never too late. And also, like, there is no imposter syndrome. I have one of my other projects include ladies, Bethany, give us a bag that says, I wish I had the confidence of a mediocre white man. And sometimes I'm like, I think I have like 3 mediocre white men sometimes because my confidence level is really high, but it's not because of what I don't have, it's what I do have. Mm-hmm. And so the imposter syndrome thing happened to me earlier on as a founder, but then even when I was not a founder, now I'm like, oh, like, yeah, you've never done this. I have. Like, you don't see the world the way I do. I have. And then also our legacies are never just around what we have built, but our legacies is about the impact that we have made in the world. And I also like said, a year ago, like, I'm never going to build something else. Now I'm like, oh, I can build this other thing. And so it definitely is there. I think everyone, it's, I think someone said, ideas and brilliance are everywhere, but opportunity may not be. And so, like, we have to give opportunity to everybody. It is not, Silicon Valley is not paved in gold, especially nowadays with the pandemic. People are now seeing that everywhere there's opportunities, that you can build whatever you want, as long as you're connected to the right people. And if anyone's watching and wants to connect with me, please do on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to make intros and all of this stuff. Like, go for it. Yana, I'll be your advisor, girl.
Okay, I have several witnesses here. Follow up on that. You talk also a lot about opportunity and seeing the opportunity, in your experience in launching Atipica, and it kind of came out of a panel, right? And where you identified like the solution kind of, and then like, well, if nobody else is going to do it, like, I'm going to do it. Yeah. You also recognize that, or mentioned, just how your family settled in, San Francisco Bay Area and in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so on one hand, it's, yes, opportunity, but on the other, it's, being in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. And so with your own success that if you reflect back, how much would you attribute to, I was in the right place at the right time versus, and maybe it's like not just versus, but or, I really worked my butt off. I did all the goal setting, the planning, and it's not that it just happened to me. I made it happen. But
I do attribute that sometimes there was some universe guiding, a higher power guiding my family to be here, to just be like, because the rest of my extended family is actually in the Central Valley, in Salinas Valley, which is they're farm workers. And so my mom was a farm worker. So this is only like 2.5 hours away. And all of them were there. And then somehow my mom, I think I had one aunt that was here. And my mom was like, okay, I'll come here. So I do attribute that. I don't attribute the rest of my career to just being here, because what happened is that I'll attribute that like, oh, I need a job. I live in Silicon Valley. It's easy, like not easy, but I can just get at a startup, which is what I did early in my career. But as my career progressed, I saw that it wasn't just being here. That, like, for example, when I started at Atipica, I was like, well, I have my network. Like, a lot of my ex-co-workers were now venture capitalists. They were writing checks for my other ex-co-workers. And that did not happen to me. And then I met with one of my ex-co-workers who actually at a happy hour, and I just showed up, and I had just started. Maybe I was like 6 months into Atipica, and he like pulled me aside, and he's like, "I'm sorry," and I was like, "Why, Mark?" And he's like, "Because it was so easy. I didn't even have a product, but as a white man, I was able to get a $3 million round." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that took And he apologized, and I think he understood, and this is really on. Like, so I think that was where it changed. Like, yeah, I could have been in Silicon Valley. I could be in all the happy hours. I could be all the network events. But I had to prove myself way more. I had to prove like what Atipica would do for the world in order for me to even get a check. And I only got the check because when we were at a retreat for Project Include, Frida Caper, from the Caper Center, she's amazing. She actually invited her neighbor in Sonoma to dinner with us, and her neighbor ended up being my investor. And so that's how the network happened. It happened because I was following a path to try to change diversity in tech with these other women, and then the investor followed up. But I had gone to all the meetings, I had gone to all the network events, and so that's where it deviates, right? Like even if you're here and doing that. So yeah, definitely was a different sort of experience for me than it was for people that don't look like me. So yeah. But I also think that the pandemic has allowed people, like now you're seeing all this stuff, like venture capitalists were like, oh, I'm leaving San Francisco. I was like, thank God we didn't like you. Like, but they're going to like Miami or
Milwaukee. No.
I'll let them know.
Awesome. Seriously, let them know. But we've talked a lot about women in STEM, women in tech and startup space. And I think any of these themes, especially in terms of, breaking down barriers and disrupting paradigms, is translatable to other fields. Thinking about like maybe your younger self, or maybe even the 20-year-old Leanna, who I explained earlier, who was kind of like between majors, really having one view of the future and what she thought it was going to be within a specific field. What would you tell that younger 20-year-old self who was on the brink of switching majors?
Oh, which I did too. I was an engineer and I switched over to development and Latin American studies. No one's going to remember your GPA, even if you're getting a C. Like, even if you're not doing as well, it's what you're learning through that, how you're going to apply it. Also, there's all these women, like 20-year-old now, like there's all these women wanting you to enter this. We're not fighting the battle, but we're clearing the way, at least to a certain extent, of all the challenges that you could possibly face, that we face, that we don't want you to face. And so it's definitely very, very much different. I'm friends with so many women that are starting organizations or have started organizations around STEM and allowing other women, like not just in tech, like in aerospace engineering, in medicine, in data and all this stuff. And so, no, definitely like continue on and persevere. And if it doesn't feel right, then it's okay to say, no, I persevered enough. Now I'm going to go on this other path, but explore that path. I am very much aware about the mental health of like, I have to keep going. But if you keep going and that wasn't it, then that's fine. You explored it. Or maybe you'll explore it another time. I really did not want to be in tech, and I have a love-hate relationship. But I came back. I did my graduate degree right after, like a year after I graduated. So I was a pretty young graduate student. I was in like 23. And then when I came back, my mom was like, get a job. And I'm like, I do not want a job. I want to change the world. I want to go to the United Nations and work for UNICEF or something. And then obviously I had to get a job. So I got a job at a startup. But like, I don't think it's too late to do anything. Like, one day maybe I will work for UNICEF. It's not too late. And maybe I'll use tech to understand how to fight for children's rights all over the world. Instead of just mobilizing on ground, like thinking about it. So yeah, explore it, because technology is not just going to be something that is based out of a certain area, that it is consumed by your laptop or your apps, or even the tools that we're using right now. It's going to be part of our everyday lives. And so it's just like literacy, to understand, to know how to read something in order to gain power and change. You need to be literate in how engineering or any other science is going to be part of our plan. Imagine like 5-6 years ago, someone says, I want to be an epidemiologist. I'm like, why? It's not that important. Imagine that person now in the middle of Corona, like using all the skills that they're having and fighting this virus that has devastated us. And so like, you never know when whatever you pursue will actually change the world.
I think those are definitely words of wisdom. and words of wisdom that can be taken at any point, right? It doesn't have to be necessary just for the 20-year-old Liana. It could be for anyone here in the audience. In thinking about, I know that we have a number of women. I think there are probably also several men watching as well. What can men do? Is there a role to support this movement of women in tech? You know, and many of the stories you shared.
Allyship. I think being allies, and allyship doesn't just mean like standing up for a woman and then be like, oh no, that's not how she's supposed to be treated. Allyship also means sponsoring a woman. Like, hey, I had all these opportunities, she didn't. Also, understanding that their paths are very much different than they have been. And so it's not just being like, oh, well, I did it like this, I'm not quite sure. So if you mentor, so like sponsor is a different thing. Sponsorship, allyship, and mentorships are all different things, but somewhere in the ground, men can do that. And also educate yourself. Like, it is a lot of emotional and mental labor for some women to come in and try to say, hey, like, that's not okay. Like, we do it for people that we love. We might do it for, you know, our brothers or friends or partners or husbands or boyfriends, but it is a lot of emotional and mental labor. Like, there are books out there. There are things that you can learn about how to be a better ally. There's so many people I follow on Twitter that are such great allies. Like, they understand, right? Like, the simplest thing, like, I was teaching, I have 2 dogs. One is almost 2 years old and the other one's a puppy. And the puppy's the male. And then he wants to play all the time with the female dog. And I'm like, boundaries. And I just say boundaries. And I know it sounds funny, but like, just saying boundaries is where like people now understand, like, he'll listen to me because obviously I am his owner and he wants to please me and I have treats, but men don't need that. Like, you know, they're adults. And so like, you know, understanding what boundaries are in all settings, as well as making sure that, are you there, Liana?
I'm still here, but my screen just went dark. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know what happened here.
Okay.
Well, we're getting close to the end here too, so maybe I'll just leave with one last question. I know that as we were getting ready for today, you know, you sent over a pic of a facial mask and some self-care. You talked about getting your nails done, and it's clear to me that you have a lot going on, a lot on your plate, a lot into the future. What do you do for your self-care and for that balance? How do you approach all of that?
I think it's important to understand how, especially after what we've been through this past year, to prioritize mental wellness, mental health, and understand that what we've been through as a nation, as a world, that it is very, very, very traumatic. You know, this will impact us for a long time. And as people out there, especially myself, as I've gotten older, fighting all the battles, like, is sometimes a little bit tough. And so I do have to prioritize myself. I do have to prioritize the mental health that is given. Like, I think, like, I did not come from a culture that allows people to prioritize the mental health. And I think it's important. I believe that in a survey that will come out soon by Project Include, that surveyed tech employees, over 70% of all tech employees talked about the mental health being impacted by working remotely or the pandemic. And I think it's not just for tech employees, like, it's impacted all of us, like, you know, isolation, being on computer screens, you know, social interaction. So definitely take care of yourself, of the mental health, and it's important. I think it's really important to have that balance.
That's so true. And I did see there was at least one question popping up in the chat. We're going to ask it, and I think we might ask you after that to kind of leave us with a parting message. So here's the question: are you seeing much change regarding how companies, policies, and programs are being family supportive equally to men and women?
I feel like family leave or family support is still very much skewed. I think a lot of women took on the role during the pandemic of, better the caregivers. I did, for example, my younger sister is an adult with developmental disabilities, so I took on that responsibility from, my family. My brother didn't take that responsibility. I did, even though my sister lives with him. So I think like a lot of women took on a lot of responsibility about family, supporting the family, making sure. I think for men and women, I do see, equal, like, I think parental leave now or family leave. Let me just call family leave because it's not just parents. It's like you can have family leave. Family leave is supported. I think it's how we expect the different, genders, not just female, male, but also non-binary, how they should be interacting while they're gone and while they're there. And I think it's also important I heard for like non employees who don't have children or who don't have any other family responsibilities to be thoughtful of those that do. And I think it's to be an ally for them. Just as I talked that men should be an ally for women, I think we should be an ally for people that have responsibilities around, family support. So I really do think that that's really important.
Awesome. And it's probably awkward to be talking to a blank screen, but I'm still here, I promise.
I'm seeing myself. I'm like, oh my God, that's how I look like.
Oh, you look great. I can still see you and you can still hear me, so that's good. Any kind of parting thoughts here as we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for having me. I think anyone watching, I think it's really important to just keep going, regardless, the geography of what you want to do, whether it's in STEM or not, but also be a little bit careful of what the things that you're putting out there in the world, because our data is being consumed nonstop, and to just understand that, things change. And as much as I talked about when I started tech almost over 20 years ago, as in my first internship, like 22 now, that had a lot has changed, little has changed, but the thing is that women will continue to demand and change a lot, and women and people of color in tech, and I definitely do think that anyone who wants an opportunity, like, look, if you're a student right now, if you want an internship, it might not be too late. Sometimes internships start, but because I think there's still going to be virtual internships, go to a tech page that you want, if you want Spotify or anything that any app that you love, and go and look at the internships. And if there's no internships, just email their jobs and be like, hey, I'm looking for an internship. Like, it's not too late. For those that are not students, like, definitely just look, there's all these intersections of technology and other, public policy, community building, social impact, education. There's all this opportunity. So just be aware that there's never too early. It's never too late, Liana, to enter the industry. And I think it's really important to continue knowing that what you see in the headlines may be what you read, but what things people, and not just, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about all these incredible people that I do know, talking about, my good friend Michelle Kim talks about anti-Asian violence. My good friend Carla Monterroso talks about racial justice through a restorative lens. There's so many amazing women out here that are just making a change in the world for everybody, not just in this 30-mile radius. And so I hope that everybody gets inspired. Also, we talked about AI, and I know that you saw Joy. Joy is a joy to be around. I've been on a panel with her, and so please do watch her film. She is brilliant. It is a little bit scary, but it's also very incredible that she was able to change the findings that she had. So please watch Code Bias, and that's it.
Well, Thank you, Laura. Knowledge is power. So I think good parting words here. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. So we will turn it back to Milwaukee Film. Thank you.
This is our first robust month-long celebration of Women's History Month. We have over 30 films, feature films and short films, returning favorites, brand new films, and 6 events featuring local and national luminaries, women that are leading the charge in activism, business, empowerment, arts, and culture. Viewers can access the Women's History Month programming through our app, which is available on a number of different platforms that you can watch on your TV, on your computer, on your tablet. What this is a celebration of women in all of their diversity, looking at their successes, their victories, but also focusing on the work that still needs to be done, the challenges that are facing women today.